Hello and welcome to the Book Club Review, the podcast about book clubs and the books that get you talking. You may love your book club just the way it is, but if you've ever considered tackling some of the more challenging works, such as Proust's In Search of Lost Time or Homer's Iliad, then we may have found just what you need. In a quiet North London street, Toby Brothers runs the Literary Salon, in which she seeks to help people unlock the secrets of the books that may seem daunting to tackle alone. She also works as a book club doctor, offering tips and suggestions to help book clubs get the best out of their sessions, and she shares some of those with us today. When we met, she told me how the idea for the salon first came to her.
I started the Literary Salon in Paris in 2004. I had moved to Paris and I was feeling a little bit ungrounded. I had been an educator and an educator of educators before I left my home in California. And then I found myself in Paris, in this gorgeous city where everybody wants to live, and I was struggling. I had conversations with people socially around the work I had previously done, and someone said, if you ever started a book group, I'd love to join it. And I thought, maybe this is something I could do. So the first study I did was on Beloved by Toni Morrison, which is one of those books that blows open the mind and gets you thinking about racism, about identity, about power, about gendered relationships, about what it is to own oneself or to be owned. And the group that did that first study with me said, okay, what work are we going to study next? And so I began charging for it because I realized that I was putting in a lot of time and my expertise and that people were committing to something with some real seriousness.
And so now you're running the groups here in London. How many will you have running at any one time, and what sorts of books are you covering?
Between 6 and 8 a week in London, but I'm also doing quite a few traveling studies. At the beginning of October, I did 2 weekends in St. Ives. So we were reading Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse, 2 houses away from the book that it's placed at. But I do, 6 to 8 studies a week, and that ranges from something smaller like Michael Ondaatje's The English Patient to works like Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie, works like James Joyce's Ulysses, Thomas Mann's Magic Mountain. For Proust, we do 2.5 years going through his incredible masterpiece. The books I choose are typically books that people have a difficult time reading on their own and find having discussions and having a variety of responses to the book opens the book up and makes it accessible.
So I was lucky enough to get to sit in on one of your groups. We just finished the Thomas Mann Magic Mountain session, and I was very struck by the amount that people were bringing to the text. Is that something that you're actively trying to encourage?
Absolutely. In our academic world, a lot of our intellectual exchange is based on competition. What I try to create here in the salon atmosphere is an atmosphere of generous exchange. Every mind works differently, and unfortunately, through the particular way our education has evolved, we prioritize a particular kind of intellect. In the salon, I try to make room for people whose intellect is perhaps more content-based, but also people whose intellect is more relational. That is, they see when ideas or patterns come together. Or people's minds who are interested in what they don't know and will bring those ideas, those questions to the surface. In a work like any of the works that we study in the salon, there is such a breadth of ideas, philosophies, history, cultural knowledge that's referenced. And if someone in the group has, for example, classical music knowledge, which I don't have, they bring that and use that to illuminate the work. They feel committed. They have kind of planted their stake in the work, and they've become a real presence in this group exchange. My role is not to be the person in the room that knows it all. That's a really uncomfortable place to be, and it's also really a myth. And what I really celebrate about the salon community, the people that choose to do these studies, is they each have a huge life experience that will illuminate these great texts, because all of these texts speak to a variety of human experiences.
you have also worked with book groups to try and help them optimize what they're doing. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Book clubs are brilliant. The energy that they release, the grassroots aspect of the book club movement, I think is so extraordinary and so heartening. Some book groups are more social experiences, which is wonderful, and that fulfills a need. Some book groups want to go further in terms of their intellectual engagement. Other book groups want to open up cultural perspectives. Sometimes it really helps to have somebody come in and help a group articulate, both individually and then as a group, what their shared goal is and how they might diverge from that. So how people might have different ideas about what they need from the group and how you can work those together. The other challenge, of course, is because we're talking about groups, there's always the issue of the dynamics between people. So in a book group, are there voices, for example, that take control? And one participant may be taking control because they feel as though the group needs guidance. Does the rest of the group agree on that? And is there a way of making sure that the other voices have equal weight in the discussion? And how can you bring those into the group? Book groups are also wonderful in not having a facilitator. It's the ultimate kind of democratic ideal. But the danger is, of course, that then the conversation can feel unguided or uncertain or without a purpose. Some of my work is to help identify ways that the group can move through a particular text, not toward a goal, because in fact one of the beautiful things about this kind of exploration is you don't need to know where you're going, and that opens up lots of interpretive possibilities, but to help the group find ways that they can use the text as a more secure base from which to step forward into a greater understanding, both of the text itself and of the individual reader and of the ideas as shared by a particular group. When I'm doing the book group consulting, I like to try to get some feedback from each participant about what their goals are, about what their experience of the group is, about what they value in that book group. And then if they have any struggles or things that they would like to do differently in the book group, gather those ideas together, sit in on the book group, watch it in action, offer, if desired, not a model class, but where I do some facilitating, and then suggest a way that there can be a shared or a named facilitator if that seems to be useful to the group. It's all about choices and kind of building a toolkit for the group.
Listening on the Magic Mountain discussion, I was struck by the way that discussion enriched my understanding of the text, but also was somehow quite life-enhancing. I felt like really there were things that I was taking away from that discussion that you had that meant things to me and that I would go away and think about. And it left me thinking that book groups, we can get together and we can read text and we can just have a very nice time, but actually we can get so much more from that if we choose to.
I'll out myself. My father's a minister. I'm not practicing in any particular faith system at the moment, but I do get somewhat evangelical, that's such a dangerous word, about how transformative the experience of encountering art can be when that experience is both felt individually and shared with a group of other minds. Literature, because it's based on language, does that so beautifully, because language is always seeking to get what we feel, what's at work deep in our consciousness, out into the shared space. So we've got this great tangible platform of the text that we can use to both reflect our own self-understanding and to expand our knowledge, not just of ourselves, but of others' experience, others' psyches, others' tragedies and struggles, and ways of seeing the world. Even the 10-year-old primary school student is interested in who or what they are in the world. And I do think literature gives us a format to consider that while having the beautiful experience of examining another life, a set of events, a beautifully rendered experience.
One thing that you did that I thought was very nice was that you had little passages that you'd obviously earmarked where you got different people in the group to read those passages, and it seemed to focus everyone's attention on that particular bit of the text, and then you were able to discuss it. But I also thought it was a very nice way of making sure that different voices were heard and people were included, and also that they all brought something to the way that they read that text. I just thought that was a lovely idea. I thought any book club could do that.
That's one of the strategies that creates a fabric, a weave of voices. In any group, well, actually, I think in any person, when you're listening to somebody else who sounds as though they're very confident in ideas, you kind of shrink. But everybody in this group has something to offer. If people are speaking up a little bit less and they read a part of the text, they're going to comment on it. And they suddenly realize the strength and the depth of their own response. Usually at the beginning of a group, and I do this more often when a group is first starting to work together, I'll use a check-in. So everybody has to answer a question that's based in that section of the text that we're considering, to either name an image or an event or a moment that really struck them, or I'll ask them something about the character. Once you've spoken the first time, it's so much easier later on. I think it's also really important with literature to hear it read aloud. When it is opened up in different accents, in different voices, the majesty and the art of it comes forward. We also pay closer attention when we're hearing something read and when we are ourselves reading aloud. So to me, that's important. It also grounds our discussion instead of us getting into a very generalized consideration. We come back into the text and we think about how the language is working, what's going on the surface, what's being implied below the surface, what patterns, interesting language that is unexpected. We've got it right there in front of us. We share the art in that moment, hearing each other read it aloud. One of the things I suggest, and when I consult book groups, I really try to keep it at the level of suggestion, not dictating, that you don't want to start with a question, oh, did I like the book? For most of the works that I offer for study, you don't actually like them at first because you don't know them. And when you work yourself into a text, even if at first it's off-putting, you'll find the warmth, you'll find the connection, and you'll find the place that it moves you, which I think is more important.
And do you have any other good tips for book clubs?
One of the things that I would really suggest is using that text. Going into the text, finding places, maybe even asking participants to choose an area of the text that they found most troublesome or they found most sublime, or both. And I often find that the places that we find troublesome or that we don't understand tend to evoke the more interesting discussions. When a writer is giving a complex idea, we tend to have to work through it and use the group for that. The other thing I would suggest is to encourage questions around particular aspects of the literature as much as insights. I think, again, unfortunately, our academic experience tends to privilege responding when we know. A book group is a great opportunity to respond when we don't know, or when we're wondering, or when something isn't clear to us. And that creation of a safe environment is also so hugely important, that if someone comes up with an idea and someone else disagrees, being able to disagree respectfully, which is something we do not do well as a society at all, it can happen in a book group. And that's also an amazing skill to take back into the world.
And I think you must be an expert by now in working out those books which make for the really good discussion books. Do you have a suggestion of something that a book club might try?
Ooh, I don't know where to stop, so I'll just give a couple possibilities. I'm a huge fan of Marilynne Robinson. I think her works are incredibly subtle and sublime. Her book, Housekeeping, which was her first fictional work, is disturbing, but I think it opens people up in brilliant ways. Any works by Toni Morrison. James Baldwin. I think James Baldwin is one, both in his fiction and his nonfiction, creates a really dynamic discussion. Elizabeth Smart's by Grand Central Station, I Lay Down and Wept, which is a really tricky work, but offers itself very well to a close study of it. Arundhati Roy, God of Small Things, is, again, disturbing, which I think is useful for a book group to have a space to hold that disturbance, and wonderfully complex around language and cultural ideas and interactions. I'm looking at my shelf. Of course, I tend to be a little bit more in not classics, significant literature, which doesn't mean that's not book club useful, but it will often take more than one meeting. Frankenstein is something that I think one could do in a meeting, although you maybe want a slightly longer meeting. Javier Marías is a Spanish writer, contemporary Spanish writer, really interesting. The Awakening by Kate Chopin. Stop me if you want me to stop, because I'll go on.
Yeah, they're great suggestions. My book club will be laughing when they hear this. We once did by Grand Central Station. I sat down and wept. And actually, I rather think we needed someone like you there to lead us through it.
That one is worth spending some time with. It is disturbing. It's really examining the presentation of Eros, the love principle, and how disruptive that can be. And Elizabeth Smart uses her own experience to inform that. It's very beautiful, but it's heart-wrenching. It's a book worth studying.
Well, there you go, my book club. That's what was going on in that book. Toby, thank you so much for your time. I've so enjoyed my time here this afternoon, and I'm going away fizzing with ideas and feeling very inspired about everything. Thank you.
Yay, pleasure. Thank you for coming and dropping in.
That's all for this episode. A quick recap of those book club book suggestions. Toby mentioned Housekeeping by Marilyn Robinson. By Grand Central Station, I Sat Down and Wept by Elizabeth Smart. The God of Small Things by Arundhati Roy. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. The Awakening by Kate Chopin. And the authors Toni Morrison, James Baldwin and Javier Marías. And for more details about the Literary Salon, the website is litsalon.co.uk, or you can email Toby at litsalon@gmail.com. Next up on the Book Club Review is our bookshelf episode, in which we discuss the books we've been reading outside of our book clubs. If you'd like to see what we're up to between shows, follow us on Instagram or Facebook at Book Club Review Podcast, on Twitter at Book Club RVW Pod, and if you're not already, why not subscribe to us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget, we'd love to hear about your book club. Drop us a line and tell us about your group, how long you've been meeting, what you're reading. We'd love to hear all about it. Email us at thebookclubreview@gmail.com. But for now, thanks for listening and happy reading.